Celtic Tales is a fascinating collection of 25 folk and fairy tales set in the ancient lands of Ireland and Scotland. This fascinating YouTube video offers us an immersive journey into a world of magic, legend, and stunning adventures told by generations of Celtic people. With majestic scenery in the background, the video takes viewers on an amazing journey back in time, where ancient gods, faeries, and heroes come to life before our eyes. Each story is steeped in deep mythological roots and the wisdom of Celtic culture, giving us a unique perspective on the world and human nature. You'll hear of daring warriors able to fight demons and creatures from other worlds, of generous fae willing to help or play a cruel trick, of love and betrayal, of journeys to mysterious lands, and of the triumph of good over evil. The visually appealing video will immerse you in a Celtic atmosphere through colorful illustrations and clever use of animation. A captivating narrator will bring each story to life with his vivid and engaging narrative style, as if you were sitting around a fire under the stars listening to a storyteller impart the wisdom and heritage of past times. Celtic Tales is more than just a collection of stories. It's a unique opportunity to experience the spirit of ancient Celtic culture, draw inspiration from magical worlds, and expand your horizons. Don't miss your chance to embark on an exciting journey back in time that will fill your life with magic and unforgettable adventures.
Chapter 20 of Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 20. Jack and his Master. A poor woman had 3 sons. The eldest and second eldest were cunning, clever fellows, but they called the youngest Jack the Fool, because they thought he was no better than a simpleton. The eldest got tired of staying at home, and said he'd go look for service. He stayed away a whole year, and then came back one day, dragging one foot after the other, and a poor wizened face on him, and as cross as 2 sticks. When he was rested, and got something to eat, he told them how he got service with the grey churl of the townland of Mischance, and that the agreement was, whoever would first say he was sorry for his bargain, should get an inch wide of the skin of his back, from shoulder to hips, taken off. If it was the master, he should pay double wages. If it was the servant, he should get no wages at all. But the thief, says he, gave me so little to eat, and kept me so hard at work, that flesh and blood couldn't stand it. And when he asked me once, when I was in a passion, if I was sorry for my bargain, I was mad enough to say I was, and here I am, disabled for life. Vexed enough were the poor mother and brothers, and the second eldest said on the spot he'd go and take service with the grey churl, and punish him by all the annoyance he'd give him till he'd make him say he was sorry for his agreement. "Oh, won't I be glad to see the skin coming off the old villain's back," said he. All they could say had no effect. He started off for the townland of Mischance, and in a 12th month he was back just as miserable and helpless as his brother. All the poor mother could say didn't prevent Jack the Fool from starting to see if he was able to regulate the grey churl. He agreed with him for a year for £20, and the terms were the same. "Now, Jack," said the grey churl, "if you refuse to do anything you are able to do, you must lose a month's wages." "I'm satisfied," said Jack, "and if you stop me from doing a thing after telling me to do it, you are to give me an additional month's wages." "I am satisfied," says the master. "Or if you blame me for obeying your orders, you must give me the same." "I am satisfied," said the master again. The first day that Jack served, he was fed very poorly, and was worked to the saddle skirts. Next day he came in just before the dinner was sent up to the parlour. They were taking the goose off the spit, but well becomes Jack, he whips a knife off the dresser and cuts off one side of the breast, one leg and thigh, and one wig, and fell to. In came the master and began to abuse him for his assurance. "Oh, you know, master, you're to feed me, and wherever the goose goes won't have to be filled again till supper. Are you sorry for our agreement?" The master was going to cry out he was, but he bethought himself in time. "Oh no, not at all," said he. "That's well," said Jack. Next day, Jack was to go to clamp turf on the bog. They weren't sorry to have him away from the kitchen at dinner time. He didn't find his breakfast very heavy on his stomach, so he said to the mistress, "I think, ma'am, it will be better for me to get my dinner now, and not lose time coming home from the bog." "That's true, Jack," said she. So she brought out a good cake, and a print of butter, and a bottle of milk, thinking he'd take them away to the bog. But Jack kept his seat, and never drew rein till bread, butter, and milk went down the red lane. "Now, mistress," said he, "I'll be earlier at my work tomorrow if I sleep comfortably on the sheltery side of a pile of dry peat on dry grass, and not be coming here and going back. So you may as well give me my supper, and be done with the day's trouble." She gave him that, thinking he'd take it to the bog, but he fell to on the spot, and did not leave a scrap to tell tales on him, and the mistress was a little astonished. He called to speak to the master in the haggard, and said he, "What are servants asked to do in this country after they've eaten their supper?" "Nothing at all, but go to bed." "Oh, very well, sir." He went up to the stable loft, stripped, and lay down, and someone saw that him told the master. He came up. "Jack, you anointed scoundrel, what do you mean? To go to sleep?" "To go to sleep, master. The mistress, God bless her, is after me giving me my breakfast, dinner, and supper, and yourself told me that bed was the next thing. Do you blame me, sir?" "Yes, you rascal, I do." "Hand me out £1.13 and fourpence." "If you please, sir." "One divil and 13 imps, you tinker. What for?" "Oh, I see. You've forgot your bargain. Are you sorry for it?" "Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I'll give you the money after your nap." Next morning early, Jack asked how he'd been employed that day. "You are to be holding the plough in that fallow outside the paddock." The master went over about 9 o'clock to see what kind of a ploughman was Jack. And what did he see but the little boy driving the bastes, and the sock and coulter of the plough skimming along the sod, and Jack pulling ding-dong again the horses. "What are you doing, you contrary thieves?" said the master. "And ain't I striving to hold this divil of a plough, as you told me? But that uncrown of a boy keeps whipping on the baste in spite of all I say. Will you speak to him?" "No, but I'll speak to you. Didn't you know, you bosthoon, that when I said holding the plough, I meant reddening the ground?" "Faith, and if you did, I wish you had said so. Do you blame me for what I have done?" The master caught himself in time, but he was so stomached he said nothing. "Go and redden the ground now, you knave, as other ploughmen do." "And are you sorry for our agreement?" "Oh, not at all, not at all." Jack ploughed away like a good workman all the rest of the day. In a day or two, the master bade him go and mind the cows in a field that had half of it under young corn. "Be sure particularly," said he, "to keep Brownie from the wheat. While she's out of mischief, there's no fear of the rest." About noon, he went to see how Jack was doing his duty, and what did he find but Jack asleep with his face to the sod, Brownie grazing near a thorn tree, and one end of a long rope around her horns, and the other end round the tree, and the rest of the beasts all trampling and eating the green wheat. Down came the switch on Jack. "Jack, you vagabond, do you see what the cows are at?" "And do you blame me, master?" "To be sure, you lazy sluggard, I do. Up!" "Hand me out £1.13 and fourpence, master. You said if I only kept Brownie out of mischief, the rest would do no harm. There she is, as harmless as a lamb. Are you sorry for hiring me, master?"
That is, not at all. I'll give you your money when you go to dinner. Now, understand me? Don't let a cow go out of the field, nor into the wheat, the rest of the day."
"Never fear, master," and neither did he. But the churl would rather that a great deal he had not hired him. The next day 3 heifers were missing, and the master bade Jack to go in search of them. "Where will I look for them?" said Jack.
"Oh, every place likely and unlikely for them all to be in."
The churl was getting very exact in his words. When he was coming into the bawn at dinner time, what work did he find Jack at but pulling armfuls of the thatch off the roof, and peeping into the holes he was making?
"What are you doing there, you rascal?"
"Sure, I'm looking for the heifers, poor things."
"What would bring them there?"
"I don't think anything could bring them in it, but I looked first into the likely places, that is, the cow houses and the pastures, and the fields next them. But now I'm looking in the unlikeliest places I can think of. Maybe it's not pleasing to you, it is."
"And to be sure it isn't pleasing to me, you aggravating goose cap."
"Please, sir, hand me £1.13 and fourpence before you sit down to your dinner. I'm afraid it's sorrow that's on you for hiring me at—"
"May the div— Oh, no, I'm not sorry. Will you begin, if you please, and put in the thatch again, just as if you were doing it for your mother's cabin?"
"Oh, faith I will, sir, with a heart and a half." And by the time the farmer came out from his dinner, Jack had the roof better than it was before, for he made the boy give him new straw. Says the master when he came out,
"Go, Jack, and look for the heifers, and bring them home."
"And where will I look for 'em?"
"Go and search for them as if they were your own."
The heifers were all in the paddock before sunset. Next morning, says the master, "Jack, the path across the bog to the pasture is very bad. The sheep does be sinking in it every step. Go and make the sheep's feet a good path." About an hour after he came to the edge of the bog, and what did he find Jack at but sharpening a carving knife, and the sheep standing or grazing round.
"Is this the way you are mending the path, Jack?"
said he. "Everything must have a beginning, master," said Jack, "and a thing well begun is half done. I am sharpening the knife, and I'll have the feet off every sheep in the flock while you'd be blessing yourself."
"Feet off my sheep, you anointed rogue! And what would you be taking their feet off for?"
"And sure to mend the path as you told me. Says you, Jack, make a path with the foot of the sheep."
"Oh, you fool, I meant make good the path for the sheep's feet."
"It's a pity you didn't say so, master. Hand me out £1.13 and fourpence if you don't like me to finish my job."
"Divil, do you good with your £1.13 and fourpence."
"It's better pray than curse, master. Maybe you're sorry for your bargain?"
"And to be sure I am not yet, anyway."
The next night the master was going to a wedding, and says he to Jack, before he set out, "I'll leave at midnight, and I wish you to come and be with me home, for fear I might be overtaken with the drink. If you're there before, you may throw a sheep's eye at me, and I'll be sure to see that they'll give you something for yourself." About 11 o'clock, while the master was in great spirits, he felt something clammy hit him on the cheek. It fell beside his tumbler, and when he looked at it, what was it but the eye of a sheep? Well, he couldn't imagine who threw it at him, or why it was thrown at him. After a little he got a blow on the other cheek, but still it was by another sheep's eye. Well, he was very vexed, but he thought better to say nothing. In 2 minutes more, when he was opening his mouth to take a sup, another sheep's eye was slapped into it. He sputtered it out and cried, "Man of the house, isn't it a great shame for you to have anyone in this room that would do such a nasty thing?" "Master," says Jack, "don't blame the honest man. Sure, it's only myself that was throwing them sheep's eyes at you to remind you I was here, and that I wanted to drink the bride and bridegroom's health. You yourself bade me." "I know that you're the great rascal, and where did you get the eyes?" "And where would I get 'em but in the heads of your own sheep? Would you have me meddle with the base of any neighbour, who might put me in the stone jug for it?" "Sorrow on me that I ever had the bad luck to meet with you." "You're all witnesses," says Jack, "that my master says he is very sorry for having met with me. My time is up, master. Hand me over double wages, and come into the next room and lay yourself out like a man that has some decency in him, till I take a strip of skin an inch broad from your shoulder to your hip." Everyone shouted out against that, but, says Jack, "you didn't injure him when he took the same strip from the backs of my 2 brothers and sent them home in that state, and penniless to their poor mother." When the company heard the rights of the business, they were only too eager to see the job done. The master bawled and roared, but there was no help at hand. He was stripped to his hips and laid on the floor in the next room, and Jack had the carving knife in his hand ready to begin. "Now, you cruel old villain," said he, giving the knife a couple of scrapes along the floor, "I'll make you an offer. Give me, along with my double wages, 200 guineas to support my poor brothers, and I'll do without the strap." "No," said he, "I'd let you skin me from head to foot first." "Here goes then," said Jack with a grin, but the first little scar he gave, Churl roared out, "Stop your hand! I'll give them money." "Now, neighbours," said Jack, "you mustn't think worse of me than I deserve. I wouldn't have the heart to take an eye out of a rat itself. I got 6 of them from the butcher, and only used 3 of them." So all came again into the other room, and Jack was made sit down, and everyone drank his health, and he drank everybody's health at one offer. And 6 stout fellows saw himself and the master home, and waited in the parlour while he went up and brought down the 200 guineas, and the double wages for Jack himself. When he got home, he brought the summer along with him to the poor mother and the disabled brothers, and he was no more Jack the Fool in the people's mouths, but Skin Churl Jack. End of chapter 20.
Chapter 21. Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 21.
Beth Gellert. Prince Llewellyn had a favourite greyhound named Gellert that had been given to him by his father-in-law, King John. He was as gentle as a lamb at home, but a lion in the chase. One day Llewellyn went to the chase and blew his horn in front of his castle. All his other dogs came to the call, but Gellert never answered it. So he blew a louder blast on his horn and called Gellert by name, but still the greyhound did not come. At last, Prince Llewellyn could wait no longer, and went off to the hunt without Gellert. He had little sport that day, because Gellert was not there, the swiftest and boldest of his hounds. He turned back in a rage to his castle, and as he came to the gate, who should he see but Gellert come bounding out to meet him? But when the hound came near him, the prince was startled to see that his lips and fangs were dripping with blood. Llewellyn started back, and the greyhound crouched down at his feet as if surprised or afraid at the way his master greeted him. Now Prince Llewellyn had a little son, a year old, with whom Gellert used to play, and a terrible thought crossed the prince's mind that made him rush towards the child's nursery, and the nearer he came, the more blood and disorder he found about the rooms. He rushed into it and found the child's cradle overturned and daubed with blood. Prince Llewellyn grew more and more terrified, and sought for his little son everywhere. He could find him nowhere, but only signs of some terrible conflict in which much blood had been shed. At last he felt sure the dog had destroyed his child, and shouting to Gellert, "Monster, thou hast devoured my child!" he drew out his sword and plunged it into the greyhound's side, who fell with a deep yell and still gazing in his master's eyes. As Gellert raised his dying yell, a little child's cry answered it from beneath the cradle, and there Llewellyn found his child unharmed and just awakened from sleep. But just beside him lay the body of a great gaunt wolf, all torn to pieces and covered with blood. Too late, Llewellyn learned what had happened while he was away. Gellert had stayed behind to guard the child, and had fought and slain the wolf that had tried to destroy Llewellyn's heir. In vain was all Llewellyn's grief. He could not bring his faithful dog to life again. So he buried him outside the castle walls within sight of the great mountain of Snowdon, where every passer-by might see his grave, and raised over it a great cairn of stones. And to this day the place is called Beth Gellert, or the grave of Gellert, and men say, I repent me as much as the man that slew his greyhound.
End of Chapter 21.
Chapter 22 of Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 22. The Tale of Ivan. There were formerly a man and a woman living in the parish of Llanlavan, in the place which is called Hurda. And work became scarce, so the man said to his wife, I will go search for work, and you may live here. So he took fair leave, and travelled far toward the east, and at last came to the house of a farmer and asked for work. What work can you do? Said the farmer. I can do all kinds of work, said Ivan. Then they agreed upon 3 pounds for the year's wages. When the end of the year came, his master showed him the 3 pounds. See, Ivan, said he, here's your wage, but if you will give it back to me, I'll give you a piece of advice instead. Give me my wage, said Ivan. No, I'll not, said the master. I'll explain my advice. Tell it me, then, said Ivan. Then, said the master, never leave the old road for the sake of a new one. After that they agreed for another year at the old wages, and at the end of it Ivan took instead a piece of advice, and this was it. Never lodge where an old man is married to a young woman. The same thing happened at the end of the 3rd year, when the piece of advice was, honesty is the best policy. But Ivan would not stay longer, but wanted to go back to his wife. Don't go today, said his master. My wife bakes tomorrow, and she shall make thee a cake to take home to thy good woman. And when Ivan was going to leave, Here, said his master, here is a cake for thee to take home to thy wife. And when ye are most joyous together, then break the cake, and not sooner. So he took fair leave of them, and travelled towards home, and at last he came to Wanher, and there he met 3 merchants from Treyren, of his own parish, coming home from Exeter Fair. "Oho, Ivan," said they, "come with us. Glad we are to see you. Where have you been so long?" "I have been in service," said Ivan, "and now I'm going home to my wife." "Oh, come with us. You'll be right welcome." But when they took the new road, Ivan kept to the old one, and robbers fell upon them before they had gone far from Ivan as they were going by the fields of the houses in the meadow. They began to cry out, "Thieves!" and Ivan shouted out, "Thieves!" too. And when the robbers heard Ivan's shout, they ran away, and the merchants went by the new road and Ivan by the old one, till they met again at Market Jew. "Oh, Ivan," said the merchants, "we are beholding to you. But for you we would have been lost men. Come lodge with us at our cost, and welcome." When they came to the place where they used to lodge, Ivan said, "I must see the host." "The host!" they cried. "What do you want with the host? Here is the hostess, and she's young and pretty. If you want to see the host, you'll find him in the kitchen." So he went into the kitchen to see the host. He found him a weak old man turning the spit. "Oh, oh," quoth Ivan, "I'll not lodge here, but will go next door." "Not yet," said the merchants. "Sup with us, and welcome." Now it happened that the hostess had plotted with a certain monk in Market Jew to murder the old man in his bed that night, while the rest were asleep, and they agreed to lay it on the lodgers. So while Ivan was in bed next door, there was a hole in the pine end of the house, and he saw a light through it. So he got up and looked, and heard the monk speaking. "I had better cover this hole," said he, "or people in the next house may see our deeds." So he stood with his back against it while the hostess killed the old man. But meanwhile Ivan, out with his knife, and putting it through the hole, cut a round piece off the monk's robe. The very next morning the hostess raised the cry that her husband was murdered, and as there was neither man nor child in the house but the merchants, she declared that they ought to be hanged for it. So they were taken and carried to prison, till at last Ivan came to them. "Alas, alas, Ivan," cried they, "bad luck sticks to us. Our host was killed last night, and we shall be hanged for it." "Ah, tell the justices," said Ivan, "to summon the real murderers." "Who knows?" they replied. "Who committed the crime?" "Who committed the crime?" said Ivan. "If I cannot prove who committed the crime, hang me in your stead." So he told all he knew, and brought out the piece of cloth from the monk's robe, and with that the merchants were set at liberty, and the hostess and the monk were seized and hanged. Then they all came together out of Market Jew, and they said to him, "Come as far as Coed Carni Wilfa, the wood of the heap of stones of watching, in the parish of Burman." Then their 2 roads separated, and though the merchants wished Ivan to go with them, he would not go with them, but went straight home to his wife. And when his wife saw him, she said, "Home in the nick of time. Here's a purse of gold that I've found. It has no name, but sure it belongs to the great lord yonder. I was just thinking what to do when you came." Then Ivan thought of the third counsel, and he said, "Let us go and give it to the great lord." So they went up to the castle, but the great lord was not in it, so they left the purse with the servant that minded the gate, and then they went home again and lived in quiet for a time. But one day the great lord stopped at their house for a drink of water, and Ivan's wife said to him, "I hope your lordship found your lordship's purse quite safe with all his money in it." "What purse is that you are talking about?" said the lord. "Sure it's your lordship's purse that I left at the castle," said Ivan. "Come with me and we will see into the matter," said the lord. So Ivan and his wife went up to the castle, and there they pointed out the man to whom they had given the purse, and he had to give it up, and was sent away from the castle. And the lord was so pleased with Ivan that he made him his servant in the stead of the thief. "Honesty's the best policy," quoth Ivan, as he skipped about in his new quarters. "How joyful I am!" Then he thought of his old master's cake that he was to eat when he was most joyful, and when he broke it, lo and behold, inside it was his wages for the 3 years he had been with him. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 23. Andrew Coffey. My grandfather, Andrew Coffey, was known to the whole barony as a quiet, decent man. And if the whole barony knew him, he knew the whole barony, every inch, hill and dale, bog and pasture, field and covert. Fancy his surprise one evening when he found himself in a part of the domain he couldn't recognize a bit. He and his good horse were always stumbling up against some tree or stumbling down into some bog hole that by rights did not to be there. On the top of all this the rain came pelting down wherever there was a clearing, and the cold March wind tore through the trees. Glad he was when he saw a light in the distance, and drawing near found a cabin, though for the life of him he couldn't think how it came there. However, in he walked, after tying up his horse, and right welcome was the brushwood fire blazing on the hearth. And there stood a chair right and tight, that seemed to say, "Come, sit down in me." There wasn't a soul else in the room. Well, he did sit, and got a little warm and cheered after his drenching, but all the while he was wondering and wondering. Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey. Good heavens! Who was calling him, and not a soul in sight? Look around as he might, indoors and out, he could find no creature with 2 legs or 4, for his horse was gone. Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, tell me a story. It was louder this time, and it was nearer. And then, what a thing to ask for! It was bad enough not to be let sit by the fire and dry oneself without being bothered for a story. Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, tell me a story, or it'll be the worse for you. My poor grandfather was so dumbfounded that he could only stand and stare. Andrew Coffey, I told you it'd be the worse for you. And with that, out there bounced, from a cupboard that Andrew Coffey had never noticed before, a man. And the man was in a towering rage. But it wasn't that. And he carried as fine a blackthorn as you'd wish to crack a man's head with. But it wasn't that either. But when my grandfather clapped eyes on him, he knew him for Patrick Rooney, and all the world knew he'd gone overboard, fishing one night long years before. Andrew Coffey would neither stop nor stay, but he took to his heels, and was out of the house as hard as he could. He ran and he ran, taking little thought of what was before, till at last he ran up against a big tree, and then he sat down to rest. He hadn't sat for a moment when he heard voices. "It's heavy he is, the vagabond. Steady now, we'll rest when we get under the big tree yonder." Now that happened to be the tree under which Andrew Coffey was sitting. At least he thought so, for seeing a branch handy he swung himself up by it and was soon snugly hidden away. Better see than to be seen, thought he. The rain had stopped and the wind fallen. The night was blacker than ever, but Andrew Coffey could see 4 men, and they were carrying between them a long box. Under the tree they came, set the box down, opened it, and who should they bring out but Patrick Rooney? Never a word did he say, and he looked as pale as old snow. Well, one gathered brushwood, and another took out tinder and flint, and soon they had a big fire roaring, and my grandfather could see Patrick plainly enough. If he had kept still before, he kept stiller now. Soon they had 4 poles up and a pole across, right over the fire, for all the world like a spit, and on to the pole they slung Patrick Rooney. "He'll do well enough," said one, "but who's to mind him whilst we're away, and who'll turn the fire? Who'll see that he doesn't burn?" With that Patrick opened his lips. "Andrew Coffey," said he. "Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey, Andrew Coffey." "I'm much obliged to you, gentlemen," said Andrew Coffey, "but indeed I know nothing about the business." "You'd better come down, Andrew Coffey," said Patrick. It was the second time he spoke, and Andrew Coffey decided he would come down. The 4 men went off, and he was left alone with Patrick. Then he sat, and he kept the fire even, and he kept the spit turning, and all the while Patrick looked at him. Poor Andrew Coffey couldn't make it all out at all, and he stared at Patrick and at the fire, and he thought of the little house in the wood, till he felt quite dazed. "Ah, but it's burning me, yar," says Patrick, very short and sharp. "I'm sure I beg your pardon," said my grandfather, "but might I ask you a question?" "If you want a crooked answer," said Patrick, "turn away, or it'll be the worse for you." But my grandfather couldn't get it out of his head. Hadn't everybody, far and near, said Patrick had fallen overboard? There was enough to think about, and my grandfather did think. Andrew Coffey, it's burning me, yar." Sorry enough my grandfather was, and vowed he wouldn't do so again. "You'd better not," said Patrick, and he gave him a cock of his eye and a grin of his teeth that just sent a shiver down Andrew Coffey's back. Well, it was odd, that here he should be in a thick wood he had never set eyes upon, turning Patrick Rooney upon a spit. You can't wonder at my grandfather thinking and not minding the fire. Andrew Coffey, it's the death of you I'll be." And with that, what did my grandfather see but Patrick unslinging himself from the spit, and his eyes glared and his teeth glistened. It was neither stop nor stay my grandfather made, but out he ran into the night of the wood. It seemed to him there wasn't a stone but was for his stumbling, not a branch but beat his face, not a bramble but tore his skin. And whenever it was clear the rain pelted down and the cold March wind howled along. Glad he was to see a light, and a minute after he was kneeling, dazed, drenched, and bedraggled by the hearth-side. The brushwood flamed, and the brushwood crackled, and soon my grandfather began to feel a little warm and dry and easy in his mind. Andrew Coffey. It's hard for a man to jump when he has been through all my grandfather had, but jump he did. And when he looked around, where should he find himself but in the very cabin he had first met Patrick in? Andrew Coffey, tell me a story." "Is it a story you want?" said my grandfather, as bold as may be, for he was just tired of being frightened. "Well, if you can tell me the rights of this one, I'll be thankful." And then he told the tale of what had befallen him from the first to the last that night. The tale was long, and maybe Andrew Coffey was weary. It's asleep he must have fallen, for when he awoken he lay on the hillside under the open heavens, and his horse grazed at his side. End of chapter 23.
Chapter 24 of Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 24. The Battle of the Birds. I will tell you a story about the wren. There was once a farmer who was seeking a servant, and the wren met him and said, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking a servant," said the farmer to the wren. "Will you take me?" said the wren. You poor creature, what good would you do?" "Try me," said the wren. So he engaged him, and the first work he set him to do was threshing in the barn. The wren threshed. What did he thresh with? Why, a flail to be sure. And he knocked off one grain. A mouse came out, and she eats that. "I'll trouble you not to do that again," said the wren. He struck again, and he struck off 2 grains. Out came the mouse, and she eats them. So they arranged a contest to see who was strongest, and the wren brings his 12 birds, and the mouse her tribe. "You have your tribe with you?" said the wren. "As well as yourself," said the mouse, and she struck out her leg proudly. But the wren broke it with his flail, and then there was a pitched battle on a set day. When every creature and bird was gathering to battle, the son of the king of Tethertown said that he would go to see the battle, and that he would bring sure word home to his father the king, who would be king of the creatures this year. The battle was over before he arrived, all but one fight between a great black raven and a snake. The snake was twined about the raven's neck, and the raven held the snake's throat in his beak, and it seemed as if the snake would get the victory over the raven. When the king's son saw this, he helped the raven, and with one blow takes the head off the snake. When the raven had taken breath and saw that the snake was dead, he said, "For thy kindness to me this day, I will give thee a sight. Come up now on the root of my two wings." The king's son put his hands about the raven before his wings, and before he stopped, he took him over 9 bens and 9 glens and 9 mountain moors. "Now," said the raven, "see you that house yonder? Go now to it. It is a sister of mine that makes her dwelling in it, and I will go bail that you are welcome. And if she asks you, 'Were you at the battle of the birds?' say you were. And if she asks, 'Did you see anyone like me?' say you did. But be sure that you meet me tomorrow morning here, in this place." The king's son got good and right good treatment that night. Meat of each meat, drink of each drink, warm water to his feet, and a soft bed for his limbs. On the next day the raven gave him the same sight over 6 bens and 6 glens and 6 mountain moors. They saw a bothy far off, but though far off they were soon there. He got good treatment this night as before, plenty of meat and drink, and warm water to his feet, and a soft bed to his limbs. And on the next day it was the same thing, over 3 bens and 3 glens and 3 mountain moors. On the third morning, instead of seeing the raven as at the other times, who should meet him but the handsomest lad he ever saw, with gold rings in his hair, with a bundle in his hand. The king's son asked this lad if he had seen a big black raven. Said the lad to him, "You will never see the raven again, for I am that raven. I was put under spells by a bad druid. It was meeting you that loosed me, and for that you shall get this bundle." "Now," said the lad, "you must turn back on the self-same steps and lie at night in each house as before. But you must not lose the bundle which I gave ye, till in the place where you would most wish to dwell." The king's son turned his back to the lad, and his face to his father's house, and he got lodging from the raven's sisters, just as he got it when going forward. When he was nearing his father's house, he was going through a close wood. It seemed to him that the bundle was growing heavy, and he thought he would look what was in it. When he loosed the bundle, he was astonished. In a twinkling he sees the very grandest place he ever saw. A great castle, and an orchard about the castle, in which was every kind of fruit and herb. He stood full of wonder and regret for having loosed the bundle, for it was not in his power to put it back again, and he would have wished this pretty place to be in the pretty little green hollow that was opposite his father's house. But he looked up and saw a great giant coming toward him. "That's the place where you have built the house, king's son," says the giant. "Yes, but it is not here I would wish it to be, though it happens to be here by mishap," says the king's son. "What's the reward for putting it back in the bundle as it was before?" "What's the reward you would ask?" says the king's son. "That you will give me the first son you have, when he is 7 years of age," says the giant. "If I have a son, you shall have him," said the king's son. In a twinkling the giant put each garden and orchard and castle in the bundle as they were before. "Now," says the giant, "take your own road, and I will take mine. But mind your promise, and if you forget, I will remember." The king's son took to the road, and at the end of a few days he reached the place he was fondest of. He loosened the bundle, and the castle was just as it was before. And when he opened the castle door, he sees the handsomest maiden he ever cast eye upon. "Advance, king's son," said the pretty maid. "Everything is in order for you, if you will marry me this very day." "It's I that am willing," said the king's son. And on the same day they married. But at the end of a day and 7 years, who would be seen coming to the castle but the giant? The king's son was reminded of his promise to the giant. Until now he had not told his promise to the queen. "Leave the matter between me and the giant," says the queen. "Turn out your son," says the giant. "Mind your promise." "You shall have him," says the king, "when his mother puts him in order for his journey." The queen dressed up the cook's son, and she gave him to the giant by the hand. The giant went away with him, but he had not gone far when he put a rod in the hand of the little laddie. The giant asked him, "If thy father had that rod, what would he do with it?" "If my father had that rod, he would beat the dogs and the cats so that they shouldn't be going near the king's meat," said the little laddie. "Thou'rt the cook's son," said the giant. He catches him by the 2 small ankles and knocks him against the stone that was beside him. The giant turned back to the castle in rage and madness, and he said that if they did not send out the king's son to him, the highest stone of the castle would be the lowest. Said the queen to the king, "We'll try it yet. The butler's son is of the same age as our son." She dressed up the butler's son, and she gave him to the giant by the hand. The giant had not gone far when he put the rod in his hand. "If thy father had that rod," says the giant, "what should he do with it?" "He would beat the dogs and the cats when they would be coming near the king's bottles and glasses." "Thou art the son of the butler," says the giant, and dashed his brains out too. The giant returned in a very great rage and anger. The earth shook under the sole of his feet, and the castle shook, and all that was in it. "Out here with thy son," says the giant, "or in the twinkling the stone that is highest in the dwelling will be the lowest." So they had to give the king's son to the giant. When they were gone a little bit from the earth, the giant showed him the rod that was in his hand and said, "What would thy father do with this rod if he had it?" The king's son said, "My father has a braver rod than that." And the giant asked him, "Where is thy father when he has that brave rod?" And the king's son said, "He will be sitting in his kingly chair." Then the giant understood that he had the right one. The giant took him to his own house, and he reared him as his own son. On a day of days when the giant was from home, the lad heard the sweetest music he ever heard in a room at the top of the giant's house. At a glance he saw the finest face he had ever seen. She beckoned to him to come a bit nearer to her, and she said her name was Auburn Mary, but she told him to go this time, but to be sure to be at the same place about that dead midnight. And as he promised, he did. The giant's daughter was at his side in a twinkling, and she said, "Tomorrow you will get the choice of my 2 sisters to marry, but say that you will not take either but me. My father wants me to marry the son of the king of the Green City, but I don't like him." On the morrow the giant took out his 3 daughters, and he said, "Now, son of the king of Tethertown, thou hast not lost by living with me so long. Thou wilt get to wife one of the two eldest of my daughters, and with her leave to go home with her the day after the wedding. If you will give me this pretty little one, says the king's son, I will take you at your word. The giant's wrath kindled, and he said, Before thou gettest her, thou must do the three things that I ask thee to do. Say on, says the king's son. The giant took him to the byre. Now, says the giant, 100 cattle are stabled here, and it has not been cleansed for 7 years. I'm going from home today, and if this byre is not clean before tonight comes, so clean that a golden apple will run from end to end of it, not only thou shalt not get my daughter, but is only a drink of thy fresh, goodly, beautiful blood that will quench my thirst this night. He begins cleaning the byre, but he might just as well to keep bailing the great ocean. After midday, when sweat was blinding him, the giant's youngest daughter came where he was, and she said to him, You are being punished, king's son. I am, says the king's son. Come over, says Auburn Mary, and lay down your weariness. I will do that, says he. There is but death awaiting me at any rate. He sat down near her. He was so tired that he fell asleep beside her. When he awoke, the giant's daughter was not to be seen, but the byre was so well cleaned that a golden apple would run from end to end of it and raise no stain. In comes the giant, and he said, Hast thou cleaned the byre, king's son? I have cleaned it, says he. Somebody cleaned it, says the giant. You did not clean it at all events, said the king's son. Well, well, says the giant, since thou wert so active today, thou wilt get to this time tomorrow to thatch this byre with bird's down, from birds with no two feathers of one color. The king's son was on foot before the sun. He caught up his bow and his quiver of arrows to kill the birds. He took to the moors, but if he did, the birds were not so easy to take. He was running after them till the sweat was blinding him. About midday, who should come but Auburn Mary. You are exhausting yourself, king's son, says she. I am, said he. There fell but these two blackbirds, and both of one color. Come over and lay down your weariness on this pretty hillock, says the giant's daughter. It's I am willing, said he. He thought she would aid him this time too, and he sat down near her, and he was not long there till he fell asleep. When he awoke, Auburn Mary was gone. He thought he would go back to the house, and he seized the byre thatched with feathers. When the giant came home, he said, Hast thou thatched the byre, king's son? I thatched it, says he. Somebody thatched it, says the giant. You did not thatch it, says the king's son. Yes, yes, says the giant. Now, says the giant, there is a fir tree beside that loch down there, and there is a magpie's nest in its top. The eggs thou wilt find in the nest. I must have them for my first meal. Not one must be burst or broken, and there are 5 in the nest. Early in the morning the king's son went where the tree was, and that tree was not hard to hit upon. Its match was not in the whole wood. From the foot to the first branch was 500 feet. The king's son was going all round the tree. She came who was always bringing help to him. You are losing the skin of your hands and feet. Ah, I am, says he. I'm no sooner up than down. This is no time for stopping, says the giant's daughter. Now you must kill me, Strip the flesh from my bones, take all those bones apart, and use them as steps for climbing the tree. When you are climbing the tree, they will stick to the glass as if they had grown out of it. But when you are coming down and have put your foot on each one, they will drop into your hand when you touch them. Be sure and stand on each bone. Leave none untouched. If you do, I will stay behind. Put all my flesh into this clean cloth by the side of the spring at the roots of the tree. When you come to the earth, arrange my bones together. Put the flesh over them, sprinkle it with water from the spring, and I shall be alive before you. But don't forget a bone of me on the tree." "How could I kill you?" asked the king's son, "after what you have done for me?" "If you won't obey, you and I are done for," said Auburn Mary. "You must climb the tree, or we are lost. And to climb the tree you must do as I say." The king's son obeyed. He killed Auburn Mary, cut the flesh from her body, and unjointed the bones as she had told him. As he went up, the king's son put the bones of Auburn Mary's body against the side of the tree, using them as steps, till he came under the nest and stood on the last bone. Then he took the eggs and coming down put his foot on every bone, then took it with him, till he came to the last bone, which was so near the ground that he failed to touch it with his foot. He now placed all the bones of Auburn Mary in order again, at the side of the spring, put the flesh on them, sprinkled it with water from the spring. She rose up before him and said, "Didn't I tell you not to leave a bone of my body without stepping on it? Now I am lame for life. You left my little finger on the tree without touching it, and I have but 9 fingers. Now," says she, "go home with the eggs quickly, and you will get me to marry tonight, if you can know me. I and my 2 sisters will be arrayed in the same garments, and made like each other. But look at me when my father says, 'Go to thy wife, king's son,' and you will see a hand without a little finger." He gave the eggs to the giant. "Yes, yes," says the giant, "be making ready for your marriage." Then indeed there was a wedding, and it was a wedding. Giants and gentlemen, and the son of the king of the green city was in the midst of them. They were married, and the dancing began. That was a dance. The giant's house was shaking from top to bottom. But bedtime came, and the giant said, "It is time for thee to go to rest, son of the king of Tethertown. Choose thy bride to take with thee from amidst those." She put out the hand of which the little finger was, and he caught her by the hand. "Thou hast aimed well this time too, but there is no knowing but we may meet thee another way," said the giant. But to rest they went. "Now," says she, "sleep not, or else you are a dead man. We must fly, quick, quick, or for certain my father will kill you." Out they went, and on the blue-grey filly in the stable they mounted. "Stop a while," says she, "and I will play a trick to the old hero." She jumped in and cut an apple into 9 shares, and she put 2 shares at the head of the bed, and 2 shares at the foot of the bed, and 2 shares at the door of the kitchen, and 2 shares at the big door, and 1 outside the house. The giant awoke and called, "Are you asleep?" "Not yet," said the apple that was at the head of the bed. At the end of a while he called again. "Not yet," said the apple that was at the foot of the bed. A while after this he called again, "Are you asleep?" "Not yet," said the apple at the kitchen door. The giant called again. The apple that was at the big door answered. "You are now going far from me," says the giant. "Not yet," says the apple that was outside the house. "You are flying," says the giant. The giant jumped on his feet, and to the bed he went, but it was cold, empty. "My own daughter's trick are trying me," said the giant. "Here's after them," says he. At the mouth of day, the giant's daughter said that her father's breath was burning her back. "Put your hand quick," said she, "in the ear of the grey filly, and whatever you find in it, throw it behind us." "There is a twig of sloe tree," said he. "Throw it behind us," said she. No sooner did he that than there were 20 miles of blackthorn wood, so thick that scarce a weasel could go through it. The giant came headlong, and there he is fleecing his head and neck in the thorns. "My own daughter's trick are here as before," said the giant. "But if I had my own big axe and wood knife here, I would not be long making a way through this." He went home for the big axe and the wood knife, and sure he was not long on his journey, and he was the boy behind the big axe. He was not long making a way through the blackthorn. "I will leave the axe and the wood knife here till I return," says he. "If you leave 'em, said a hoodie that was in a tree. "We'll steal 'em." "If you will do that," says the giant, "I must take them home." He returned home and left them at the house. At the heat of the day, the giant's daughter felt her father's breath burning her back. "Put your finger in the filly's ear and throw behind whatever you find in it." He got a splinter of grey stone, and a twinkling there were 20 miles by breadth and height of great grey rock behind them. The giant came full pelt, but past the rock he could not go. "The tricks of my own daughter are the hardest things that ever met me," says the giant. "But if I had my lever and my mighty mattock, I would not be long in making my way through this rock also." There was no help for it but to turn the chase for them, and he was the boy to split the stones. He was not long in making a road through the rock. "I will leave the tools here, and I will return no more." "If you leave 'em, says the hoodie. "We will steal 'em." "Do that if you will. There is no time to go back." At the time of breaking the watch, the giant's daughter said that she felt her father's breath burning her back. "Look in the filly's ear, king's son, or else we are lost." He did so, and it was a bladder of water that was in her ear this time. He threw it behind him, and there was a fresh water loch 20 miles in length and breadth behind them. The giant came on, but with the speed he had on him, he was in the middle of the loch, and he went under, and he rose no more. On the next day the young companions were come in sight of his father's house. "Now," says she, "my father is drowned, and he won't trouble us any more. But before we go further," says she, "go you to your father's house, and tell that you have the likes of me. But let neither man nor creature kiss you, for if you do, you will not remember that you have ever seen me." Every one he met gave him welcome and luck, and he charged his father and mother not to kiss him. But as mishap was to be, an old greyhound was indoors, and she knew him and jumped up to his mouth, and after that he did not remember the giant's daughter. She was sitting at the well's side as he left her, but the king's son was not coming. In the mouth of night she climbed up into a tree of oak that was beside the well, and she lay in the fork of that tree all night. A shoemaker had a house near the well, and about midday on the morrow the shoemaker asked his wife to go for a drink for him out of the well. When the shoemaker's wife reached the well, and when she saw the shadow of her that was in the tree, thinking it was her own shadow, and she never thought till now that she was so handsome, she gave a cast to the dish that was in her hand, and it was broken on the ground, and she took herself to the house without vessel or water. "Where is the water, wife?" said the shoemaker. "You shambling, contemptible old carle, without grace. I have stayed too long your water and wood thrall." "I think, wife, that you have turned crazy. Go you, daughter, quickly, and fetch drink for your father." His daughter went, and in the same way so it happened to her. She never thought till now that she was so lovable, and she took herself home. "Up with the drink," said her father. "You homespun shoe carle, do you think I'm fit to be your thrall?" The poor shoemaker thought that they had taken a turn in their understandings, and he went himself to the well. He saw the shadow of the maiden in the well, and he looked up to the tree, and he sees the finest woman he ever saw. "Your seat is wavering, but your face is fair," said the shoemaker. "Come down, for there is need of you for a short while at my house." The shoemaker understood that this was the shadow that had driven his people mad. The shoemaker took her to his house, and he said that he had but a poor bothy, but that she should get a share of all that was in it. One day the shoemaker had shoes ready, for on that very day the king's son was to be married. The shoemaker was going to the castle with the shoes of the young people, and the girl said to the shoemaker, "I would like to get a sight of the king's son before he marries." "Come with me," says the shoemaker. "I am well acquainted with the servants at the castle, and you shall get a sight of the king's son and all the company." And when the gentles saw the pretty woman that was here, they took her to the wedding room, and they filled for her a glass of wine. When she was going to drink what was in it, a flame went up out of the glass, and a golden pigeon and a silver pigeon sprang out of it. They were flying about, when 3 grains of barley fell on the floor. The silver pigeon sprang and ate that up. Said the golden pigeon to him, "If you remembered when I cleared the byre, you would not eat that without giving me a share." Again there fell 3 other grains of barley, and the silver pigeon sprang and ate that up as before. "If you remembered when I thatched the byre, you would not eat that without giving me my share," says the golden pigeon. 3 other grains fall, and the silver pigeon sprang and ate that up. "If you remembered when I harried the magpie's nest, you would not eat that without giving me my share," says the golden pigeon. "I lost my little finger bringing it down, and I want it still." The king's son minded, and he knew who it was that was before him. "Well," said the king's son to the guests at the feast, "when I was a little younger than I am now, I lost the key of a casket that I had. I had a new key made, but after it was brought to me, I found the old one. Now I leave it up to anyone here to tell me what I am to do. Which of the keys should I keep?" "My advice to you," said one of the guests, "is to keep the old key, for it fits the lock better, and you're more used to it." Then the king's son stood up and said, "I thank you for wise advice and an honest word. This is my bride, the daughter of the giant who saved my life at the risk of her own. I'll have her and no other woman." So the king's son married Auburn Mary, and the wedding lasted long, and all were happy. But all I got was butter on a live coal, porridge in a basket, and they sent me for water to the stream, and the paper shoes came to an end. End of chapter 24. The Battle of the Birds.
Chapter 25 of Celtic Fairy Tales. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 25. Brewery of Eggshells. In Trenigluis there is a certain shepherd's cot known by the name of Tent y Cymrys, because of the strange strife that occurred there. There once lived a man and his wife, and they had twins whom the woman nursed tenderly. One day she was called away to the house of a neighbor at some distance. She did not much like going and leaving her little ones all alone in a solitary house, especially as she had heard tell of the good folk haunting the neighborhood. Well, she went and came back as soon as she could, but on her way back she was frightened to see some old elves of the blue petticoat crossing her path, though it was midday. She rushed home, but found her two little ones in the cradle, and everything seemed as it was before. But after a time the good people began to suspect that something was wrong, for the twins didn't grow at all. The man said, "They're not ours." The woman said, "Whose else should they be?" And so arose the great strife, so that the neighbors named the cottage after it. It made the woman very sad, so one evening she made up her mind to go and see the wise man of Llanidloes, for he knew everything and would advise her what to do. So she went to Llanidloes and told the case to the old wise man. Now there was soon to be a harvest of rye and oats, so the wise man said to her, "When you are getting dinner for the reapers, clear out the shell of a hen's egg and boil some pottage in it, and then take it to the door as if you meant it as a dinner for the reapers. Then listen if the twins say anything. If you hear them speaking of things beyond the understanding of children, go back and take them up and throw them into the waters of Lake Elvin. But if you don't hear anything remarkable, do them no injury." So when the day of the reap came, the woman did all that the wise man ordered, and put the eggshell on the fire, and took it off and carried it to the door, and there she stood and listened. Then she heard one of the children say to the other, "Acorn before oak I knew, and egg before a hen, but I never heard of an eggshell brew a dinner for harvest men." So she went back into the house, seized the children, and threw them into the linn, and the goblins in their blue trousers came and saved their dwarfs, and the mother had her own children back, and so the great strife ended. End of chapter 25.
Chapter 26 of Celtic Fairy Tales, aka Terror Joan. Celtic Fairy Tales, selected and edited by Joseph Jacobs. Chapter 26. The Lad with the Goat Skin. Long ago, a poor widow woman lived down near the iron forge, by Enniscorth, and she was so poor she had no clothes to put on her son, so she used to fix him in the ash hole near the fire, and pile the warm ashes about him, and according as he grew up, she sunk the pit deeper. At last, by hook or by crook, she got a goat skin, and fastened it around his waist, and he felt quite grand, and took a walk down the street. So says she to him next morning, "Tom, you thief, you never done any good yet, and you 6 foot high, and past 19. Take that rope, and bring me a faggot from the wood." "Never say it twice, mother," says Tom. "Here goes." When he had gathered and tied, what should come up but a big giant, 9 foot high, and made a lick of a club at him. Well, become Tom, he jumped to one side, and picked up a rampike, and the first crack he gave the big fellow, he made him kiss the clod. "If you air a prayer," says Tom, "now's the time to say it, before I make fragments of you." "I have no prayers," says the giant, "but if you spare my life, I'll give you that club, and as long as you keep from sin, you'll win every battle you ever fight with it." Tom made no bones about letting him off, and as soon as he got the club in his hands, he sat down on the bresna, and gave it a tap with the kipeen, and says, "Faggot, I had great trouble gathering you, and run the risk of my life for you. The least you can do is to carry me home." And sure enough, The wind of the word was all it wanted, and it went off through the wood, groaning and crackling, till it came to the widow's door. Well, when the sticks were all burned, Tom was sent off again to pick more, and this time he had to fight with a giant that had 2 heads on him. Tom had a little more trouble with him, that's all, and the prayers he said was to give Tom a fife that nobody could help dancing when he was playing it. Begonies, he made the big faggot dance home, with himself sitting on it. The next giant was a beautiful boy with 3 heads on him. He had neither prayers nor catechism, no more nor the others. And so he gave Tom a bottle of green ointment that wouldn't let you be burned, nor scalded, nor wounded. "And now," says he, "there's no more of us. You may come and gather sticks here till little lunacy day in harvest, without giant or fairyman to disturb you." Well now, Tom was prouder nor 10 paycocks, and used to take a walk down street in the heel of the evening, but some of the little boys had no more manners than if they were Dublin jackeens, and put out their tongues at Tom's club and Tom's goatskin. He didn't like that at all, and it would be mean to give one of them a clout. At last, what should come through the town but a kind of a bellman, only it's a big bugle he had, and a huntsman's cap on his head, and a kind of a painted shirt. So this, he wasn't a bellman, and I don't know what to call him, bugleman, maybe, proclaimed that the King of Dublin's daughter was so melancholy that she didn't give a laugh for 7 years, and that her father would grant her in marriage to whoever would make her laugh 3 times. "That's the very thing for me to try," says Tom, and so, without burning any more daylight, he kissed his mother, curled his club at the little boys, and off he set along the Yalla high road to the town of Dublin. At last Tom came to one of the city gates, and the guards laughed and cursed at him instead of letting him in. Tom stood it all for a little time, but at last one of them, out of fun as he said, drove his bayonet half an inch or so into his side. Tom done nothing but take the fellow by the scruff of the neck and the waistband of his corduroys, and fling him into the canal. Some run to pull the fellow out, and others to let manners into the vulgarian with their swords and daggers. But a tap from his club sent them headlong into the moat or down on the stones, and they were soon begging him to stay his hands. So at least one of them was glad enough to show Tom the way to the palace yard, and there was the king, and the queen, and the princess in a gallery, looking at all sorts of wrestling and sword-playing, and long dances, and mumming, all to please the princess, but not a smile came over her handsome face. Well, they all stopped when they seen the young giant, with his boy's face, and long black hair, and his short curly beard, for his poor mother couldn't afford to buy razors, and his great strong arms and bare legs, and no covering but the goat skin that reached from his waist to his knees. But an envious wizened bit of a fellow with a red head that wished to be married to the princess, and didn't like how she opened her eyes at Tom, came forward and asked his business very snappishly. "My business," says Tom, says he, "is to make the beautiful princess, God bless her, laugh 3 times. Do you see all them merry fellows and skilful swordsmen," says the other, "that could eat you up with a grain of salt, and not a mother's soul of them ever got a laugh from her these 7 years?" So the great fellows gathered round Tom, and the bad man aggravated him till he told them he didn't care a pinch of snuff for the whole billion of 'em. Let 'em come on, 6 at a time, and try what they could do. The king, who was too far off to hear what they were saying, asked what did the stranger want. "He wants," said the red-headed fellow, "to make hares of your best men." "Oh," says the king, "if that's the way, let one of 'em turn out and try his mettle." So one stood forward, with sword and pot-lid, and made a cut at Tom. He struck the fellow's elbow with the club, and up over their heads flew the sword, and down went the owner of it on the gravel from a thump he got on the helmet. Another took his place, and another, and another, and then half a dozen at once, and Tom sent swords, helmets, shields, and bodies rolling over and over, and themselves bawling out that they were killed, and disabled, and damaged, and rubbing their poor elbows and hips, and limping away. Tom contrived not to kill anyone, and the princess was so amused that she let a great sweet laugh out of her that was heard all over the yard. "King of Dublin," says Tom, "I've caught her your daughter." And the king didn't know whether he was glad or sorry, and all the blood in the princess's heart run into her cheeks. So there was no more fighting that day, and Tom was invited to dine with the royal family. Next day, Redhead told Tom of a wolf, the size of a yearling heifer, that used to be serenading about the walls and eating people and cattle, and said what a pleasure it would give the king to have it killed. "With all my heart," says Tom. "Send a Jackeen to show me where he lives, and we'll see how he behaves to a stranger." The princess was not well pleased, for Tom looked a different person with fine clothes and nice green beard over his long curly hair, and besides, he'd got one laugh out of her. However, the king gave his consent, and in an hour and a half the horrible wolf was walking into the palace yard, and Tom a step or two behind, with his club on his shoulder, just as a shepherd will be walking after a pet lamb. The king and queen and princess were safe up in their gallery, but the officers and people of the court that were patrolling around the green bourne, when they saw the big beast coming in, gave themselves up and began to make for doors and gates, and the wolf licked his chops as if he was saying, "Wouldn't I enjoy a breakfast of a couple of years?" The king shouted out, "Oh, Tom with the goat skin, take away that terrible wolf, and you must have all my daughter." But Tom didn't mind him a bit. He pulled out his flute and began to play like vengeance, and dickens a man or boy in the yard but began shovelling away heel and toe. And the wolf himself was obliged to get on his hind legs and dance Tatter Jack Walsh along with the rest. A good deal of the people got inside and shut the doors, the way the hairy fellow wouldn't pin 'em. But Tom kept playing, and the outsiders kept dancing and shouting, and the wolf kept dancing and roaring with the pain his legs were giving him. And all the time he had his eyes on Redhead, who was shut out along with the rest. Wherever Redhead went, the wolf followed, and kept one eye on him, and the other on Tom, to see if he would give him leave to eat him. But Tom shook his head, and never stopped the tune, and Redhead never stopped dancing and bawling, and the wolf dancing and roaring, one leg up and the other down, and he ready to drop out of his standing from fair tiresomeness. When the princess seen that there was no fear of anyone being killed, she was so diverted by the stew that Redhead was in, that she gave another great laugh, and well become Tom, out he cried, "King of Dublin, I have two halves of your daughter." "Oh, halves or alls," says the king. "Put away that divil of a wolf, and we'll see about it." So Tom put his flute in his pocket, and says he to the baste that was sitting on his curabingo ready to faint, "Walk off to your mountain, my fine fellow, and live like a respectable baste, and if ever I find you come within 7 miles of any town, I'll—" He said no more, but spit in his fist and gave a flourish of his club. It was all the poor devil of a wolf wanted. He put his tail between his legs and took to his pumps without looking at man or mortal, and neither sun, moon, or stars ever saw him in sight of Dublin again. At dinner everyone laughed but the foxy fellow, and sure enough he was laying out how he'd settle poor Tom the next day. "Well, to be sure," says he, "King of Dublin, you are in luck. There's the Danes moidering us to no end. Deuce, run to Lusk with 'em, and if anyone can save us from 'em,
It's this gentleman with the goat skin. There is a flail hanging on the collar beam. In hell, and neither Dane nor Divil can stand before it. So, says Tom to the king, will you let me have the other half of the princess if I bring you the flail? No, no, says the princess. I'd rather never be your wife than see you in that danger. But Redhead whispered and nudged Tom about how shabby it would look to Neog the adventure, so he asked which way he was to go, and Redhead directed him. Well, he travelled and travelled till he came in sight of the walls of hell, and bedad, before he knocked at the gate, he rubbed himself over with the greenish ointment. When he knocked, 100 little imps popped their heads out through the bars, and asked him what he wanted. I want to speak to the big divil of all, says Tom. Open the gate. It wasn't long till the gate was thrown open, and the old boy received Tom with bows and scrapes, and asked his business. My business isn't much, says Tom. I only came for the loan of that flail that I see hanging on the collar beam, for the King of Dublin to give a thrashing to the Danes. Well, says the other, the Danes is much better customers to me, but since you walked so far, I won't refuse. Hand that flail, says he to a young imp, and he winked the far-off eye at the same time. So, while some were barring the gates, the young devil climbed up and took down the flail that had the handstaff and both made out of red-hot iron. The little vagabond was grinning to think how it would burn the hands of Tom, but the dickens a burn it made on him, no more nor if it was a good oak sapling. Thank ye, says Tom. Now would you open the gate for a body, and I'll give you no more trouble. Oh, tramp, says old Nick, is that the way? Is it easier getting inside them gates than getting out again? Take that tool from him and give him a dose of the oil of stirrup. So one fellow put out his claws to seize on the flail, but Tom gave him such a welt of it on the side of the head that he broke off one of his horns, and made him roar like a devil as he was. Well, they rushed at Tom, but he gave them little and big, such a thrashing as they didn't forget for a while. At last says the old thief of all, rubbing his elbow, Let the fool out, and woe to whoever lets him in again, great or small. So out marched Tom, and away with him, without minding the shouting and cursing they kept up at him from the tops of the walls. And when he got home to the big bawn of the palace, there never was such running and racing as to see himself and the flail. When he had his story told, he laid down the flail on the stone steps, and bid no one for their lives to touch it. If the king and queen and princess made much of him before, they made 10 times more of him now, but Redhead, the mean scruff hound, stole over, and thought to catch hold of the flail to make an end of him. His fingers hardly touched it, when he let a roar out of him, as if heaven and earth were coming together, and kept flinging his arms about and dancing, that it was pitiful to look at him. Tom ran at him as soon as he could rise, and caught his hands in his too, and rubbed them this way and that, and the burning pain left them before he could reckon one. Well, the poor fellow, between the pain that was only just gone, and the comfort he was in, had the comicalest face that you ever see. It was such a mixtherum gatherum of laughing and crying. Everyone burst out laughing. The princess could not stop no more than the rest. And then says Tom, Now, ma'am, if there were 50 halves of you, I hope you'll give me them all. Well, the princess looked at her father, and by my word, she came over to Tom and put her 2 delicate hands into his 2 rough ones, and I wish it was myself in his shoes that day. Tom would not bring the flail into the palace. You may be sure no other body went near it. And when the early risers were passing next morning, they found 2 long clefts in the stone, where it was after burning itself and opening downwards. Nobody could tell how far. But a messenger came in at noon, and said that the Danes were so frightened when they heard of the flail coming into Dublin, that they got into their ships and sailed away. Well,
I suppose before they were married, Tom got some man like Pat Mara of Tomenine to learn him the principles of politeness, fluxion, gunnery, and fortification, decimal fractions, practice, and the rule of 3 direct. The way he'd be able to keep up a conversation with the royal family. Whether he ever lost his time learning them sciences, I'm not sure, but 'tis as sure as fate that his mother never more saw any want till the end of her days. End of chapter 26. Recording by Karen Yamada, aka Teru Joan. End of Celtic Fairy Tales by Joseph Jacobs.